Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. As you know, the central government here in the UK has a plan to introduce ID cards for all citizens. You might think this is a perfectly logical thing to do. Perhaps your country has ID cards. But here in the UK, we don't have them. And many people feel that having them violates our democratic principles. In our last podcast, we read about Northern Ireland's response, where they said, no, we don't want ID cards. And now I have found a report from last week which indicates Scotland also is saying no. Now, the central government has given much of its power to the different nations around the UK, but it still controls the borders. And it plans to introduce ID cards to stop immigration, or at least to stop people who are here illegally finding work. So we're going to read through the Scottish response today and how they are saying, no, we don't want ID cards. So let's read it and then we'll discuss a little bit more. Right, here we are. So you can see the headline there. It's very clear. It says, Swinney says ID scheme is attempt to force Scots to be British. Right, let's just look at this. So Swinney, that's Mr. Swinney, he's the First Minister of Scotland. Okay, so there's a picture of him, and you can see there it says John Swinney said that he opposed the mandatory aspects of the scheme. So we already have Northern Ireland saying very strongly, no, don't bring them here. And now we have the Scottish government also saying no. Let's read what John Swinney has to say. First Minister John Swinney has said he is opposed to a mandatory UK digital ID scheme as an infringement on daily lives. In a social media post, he said Sir Keir Starmer was attempting to force every Scot to declare ourselves British. The Prime Minister has announced plans for the scheme as a means of tackling illegal working and making borders more secure. Swinney also hit out at descriptions of the new ID as a Brit card. That would be because, of course, Scottish people now, well, many of them want to be independent, and calling this whole country British is a little bit insulting. London is certainly not popular these days. At least the government is not popular. When I say London, I'm referring, of course, to our central government. Let's continue. However, Scottish Secretary Douglas Alexander said it would not be called a Brit card and was not even a card. Okay, so just to try to explain a little bit, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have their own governments. England is operated by the central government. I don't know why they don't have their own parliament. Probably would be a headache for the central government if that happened. And the Scottish Secretary is the central government's person who exists in Scotland. Okay, so Scotland have their own governments, but the Scottish secretary is the man from the central government who's in Scotland who communicates between both, almost like an ambassador, you could say. So it says here, Scottish Secretary Douglas Alexander said, well, it would not be called a Brit card, and it's not even a card. So, of course, he's supporting the central government. That's who he works for. He says it's more like a digital payment card or a boarding pass stored on a mobile phone. And if we read on, it says here, the initiative, similar to schemes already operating in Australia, Estonia, and Denmark, would be mandatory for adults in the UK. In a post on X, John Swinney said, I am opposed to mandatory digital ID. People should be able to go about their daily lives without such infringements. That aside, by calling it BritCard, the Prime Minister seems to be attempting to force every Scot to declare ourselves British. I am a Scot, meaning a Scottish parson. Okay, and then the Secretary of State has repeated his message. The description was wrong. He says, we've got boarding passes, train tickets, Tesco club cards on our phones already. And he's saying here, and I can be very clear, you won't be required to carry it or produce it, except to prove your right to work in the United Kingdom. Yes, this is a very serious thing, of course, because many Scottish people no longer want to be called British. They prefer to be called Scottish. The central government doesn't really have much power anymore, except to make decisions which affect borders and probably healthcare, I think, in some areas as well. But they can't force the four nations to take ID cards unless they use their power of control over the border to push it in. What I'm saying is the central government can't introduce ID cards just because it wants to, but it can if it's about borders, because it's one of the few powers the central government has left. It controls the border of the whole of the UK. Let's read on. So the Conservative Party, these are the Scottish Conservatives, said Labour's plans were flawed and would lead to state control, which violated the right to privacy. So this is the opposition to the government saying that, well, actually, it's a stupid plan anyway. Well, they weren't going to like it, were they? Because they are, after all, the opposition. And they also said that the Scottish leader, John Swinney, was guilty of blatant hypocrisy and playing politics. And then it continues because the Scottish Nationals, they actually wanted their own digital ID scheme in 2021. So it seems very strange that they would now be saying, well, we don't want the central government to have one. But perhaps he's right, though. Maybe the problem is this idea that it's going to make us all British. Kate Forbes, who's the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, said she received a call from the UK government about the scheme on Thursday and was awaiting further details about how it would work. And then there's analysis here by a political correspondent of BBC Scotland. He says here there are ways in which the Scottish government could be sympathetic. He goes on to talk about that. We do actually have, Scottish people here in Scotland do actually have some kind of ID card in the form of a bus pass Not everyone has it. Those of us who still work and pay on the bus, we don't have one. But there is a card which disabled people use and students use, which is called the Saltire card. So that could be used by the Scottish people. But there's all kinds of concerns about that. Well, I have a concern about that for a start because I pay on buses. I don't have a Saltire card. I work. And more and more, it seems that in Scotland, many people don't. Let's just continue. This idea of calling it a Brit card was like a red rag to a bull. Well, nobody in Scotland was going to like that anyway. It's a very stupid idea to call it a Brit card, especially when Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland are all looking at how they can possibly leave the UK. What did people in Scotland think of the ID plan? Well, very mixed views here. Here's some random people. This person said it worked well in Australia. These two people, what are they saying? If you've nothing to hide, what's wrong with it? Well, a good idea. These ones, they have reservations. That means they're not so sure whether they like it or not. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at another page about this. So just bear with me a second. Let me just swap over. We're going to go to another page as well. Right, this is our government petition page. If you feel strongly about something, you can go to this page and you can set up a petition and force the government to reconsider. There's many petitions ongoing, some of them stupid, but some of them reasonably sensible. And the one for do not introduce digital ID cards has received 1,890 signatures in the last hour. Let's just see what other petitions are ongoing here. You need 10,000 for the government to respond. Invest in brain cancer. Here's another one. Do not introduce digital ID cards. Use proportional representation at the next general election. Yes, that's another story. Keep the 5-year plan to let Hong Kong people stay. Yeah. Ban fossil fuel advertising. I don't know what that is. But anyway, we are concerned about the digital ID cards. Okay, so it currently has 2 million signatures, 764,954. So this is rising, as you can see. Right, we demand that the UK government immediately commits to not introducing a digital ID. There are reports that this is being looked at. Parliament will consider this for a debate, and they've already responded yesterday, talking about their intentions. Now, of course, the government will not give up easily. They will keep going until they do what they want to do. But where the four governments, the central government and Northern Ireland and Scotland, and Wales, remember that England is looked after by the central government itself. If the central governments start fighting with them, there's no way this is going to be implemented. So let's see what the government have said. This is their response to the people who are protesting. The government have said, we will introduce a digital ID within this parliament to help tackle illegal migration, making accessing government services easier and enable wider efficiencies. We will consult on this soon. And they've gone on to say why it's good, why they're doing it. But they're, well, they're not really saying they're going to back down. Look at this, for example. Currently, when UK citizens and residents use public services, start a new job, or, for example, buy alcohol, they need to present an assortment of physical documents to prove who they are or things about themselves. This is bureaucratic for the individual and creates space for abuse and fraud. Okay, so then this does sound like the ID card isn't only going to be used for employment. Because remember, our story of, well, from earlier in the week, I think it was, or was it last week? We were talking about the central government saying, well, of course, you would only ever need this if you plan to work in the UK. It's a card which employers will ask for. Well, according to this, that's not the case. It's saying here, for example, buying alcohol. Yeah. They are mentioning working in modern slavery, but now they're saying there are too many people who are excluded, who don't have a physical photo ID to access products and services. So that's a bit of a shift, because when this first came out, we were told, oh, don't worry, it's only for employment. But now it looks like it's not only for employment. And what does this have to do with immigration? I have a question whether the central government have the power to introduce this then. Because if they're using Border Patrol to bring it in, if that's their rule, surely if I go to buy a bottle of whiskey, that's got nothing to do with immigration, has it? Am I only showing that card to prove I'm British? That would be very strange. So they're saying to tackle these interlinked issues, we will introduce a new national ID. Yeah, I don't know if they're getting a bit confused there, or if maybe it's just the way this is being presented to us. And at the end, by the end of this parliament, employers will have to check the new digital ID when conducting a right to work. That's the reason they were bringing that in. Nothing to do with me buying my whiskey, which I don't drink, by the way. Here we are. So it will not be a criminal offense to not hold a digital ID. It will not be a criminal offense to not hold it. What's the point of it then? And police will not be able to demand to see it as part of a stop and search. This doesn't make any sense. It's getting stranger and stranger. I would imagine by the end of this, what they'll be saying is, oh, well, we'll bring it in, but take it if you want it. If not, forget it. That's usually what they do with everything they offer us. They make it optional. I think the reason why we have a problem with this is because they're calling it British, first of all. And secondly, because everyone hates the central government, because we all have our own versions and identities now, some of which are not related to nationality. And thirdly, just because of the way it's being implemented, I think. So it's very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting indeed. So there we are, some information for you about Scotland's response and more of a background as to exactly what's happening here in the UK. Okay, so here's my big prediction for what I think is likely to happen. Well, first of all, if the four nations don't agree to this, the central government can use their powers of looking after the border to bring it in, but they would have to persuade the four nations to actually implement it, which they could do. I mean, of course, they have power to bring things in. especially when it's affecting borders. So it can be brought in without their consent. But of course, if three of the governments out of the four don't like it, it will be very, very difficult for the central government to push it through. There's also the idea that this has to pass through Parliament. Our Parliament House has to agree it, and then the upper Parliament, the House of Lords, has to agree it. And everyone is very sensitive. As you can see, we have over 2 million people immediately saying, no, don't try to tell us this is only for employment, then tell us it's a photo ID check to buy my whiskey. No, no. So I can see this being completely platooned before it even begins. I don't know. It might get through, maybe in a different format, like, okay, we only give it to immigrants. We only give it to those people who are living here and weren't born here. It will be something like that. But in its current form, I think it'll be dead before it reaches the water. That's my opinion. I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. Please leave a comment and let me know. And as the story progresses, I'm going to be giving you further updates because it really does highlight how much our government isn't trusted or liked. And also, especially with this issue of privacy, people don't care very much these days, I think, about their national identity. We all live in our own bubbles. Oh, I want to be Welsh. I want to be Scottish. I'm Northern Irish. Don't bring me into a British system of anything. And then we have our other identities, of course. Well, I am trans. I am gay. I am black. I am white. We don't want to be put all together into one central database anyway. And that's the reason up until now why we haven't had ID cards, because databases like this could be very, very dangerous. Next thing you know, you go to the supermarket trying to buy my chicken, and I'm told, actually, you bought 6 chickens yesterday. We have a shortage of chickens, so we're not giving you any more today. That's the fear here. And then if they start racially profiling people, well, that's dangerous. So that's why I think as this whole thing gets blown up out of proportion from, yeah, it's only for the borders, into actually it's about you buying alcohol, it's about you buying things, it's not going to happen, I think. But it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing dies. And I will be here to bring you reports as it does. See you. Bye.